Hey everyone, and welcome back to another mining chamber video. In this video, I will talk about the different operating systems that you can consider for mining, and I will also compare them and tell you my own opinion later on in the video. Now let's get into it right after the intro. One of the most common questions or troubles I find is when people finish building their mining rig and then they don't know what to do next. Even if you have built a couple of mining rigs and you're running them, you might still be wondering if there's a better option out there for your operating system. But before we dig into that, let's first explain how this operating system fiasco works for all the beginners out there. This will be a brief explanation, so bear with me please. Your mining rig is essentially a PC, just like I explained in the buying strategy video. So your PC, in this case your mining rig, needs an operating system to run beyond the BIOS screen. The operating system is installed on your storage device, whether you're using a USB key or an SSD or an HDD. Now there are limitations for using a USB, and we will talk about that later on. You can only have one operating system flashed on your storage device, but if you know what you're doing, you can do dual booting, which means flashing two different operating systems on your storage device. But for the sake of this video, we'll just keep it basic. Now I won't show you exactly how to flash an operating system on your storage device because I do cover it in any operating system guide that I do. For example, the Windows guide, I show how to flash Windows on your USB stick, and then the HiveOS guide that I have out there, I also show it in there. So just to avoid being redundant, I'm not going to go over it here, but now hopefully you understand the very basics of just an operating system and a storage device. Although one thing I want to mention is not to confuse mining software to operating system. So for example, Phoenix Miner, TRX Miner, TeamRed Miner, and all these different CLI mining applications, they're just mining software, so you can run these on different operating systems as well, whether you're using Windows or a Linux-based mining operating system. And then there's also miners, for example Cryptex or NiceHash, and these just use those CLI miners that I mentioned. So they're not their own miners, but they just use Phoenix Miner or whatever one you choose in their software, and then they just take a percentage from you for simplifying the process. So just make sure that you know the difference between a mining software and an operating system. I will also be making a video talking about different mining software, so for now just make sure that you understand that operating systems and mining software are completely different. Now let's talk about operating systems. Finding the right operating system for you depends on your condition. So if you have multiple mining rigs, you might need a Linux-based mining operating system so it's easier for you to manage them. And if you have just a couple of rigs, then running them on Windows can be fine for you. So the list that I will be covering is, first we have Windows, and then after Windows we have Linux-based mining operating systems. So that will include HiveOS, RaveOS, and all these different Linux-based mining operating systems. There are plenty of them out there. And then we're also going to talk about a standalone Ubuntu that you can just run by yourself without having a third party in between. So firstly, Windows. As far as I know, Windows is the first place that people started mining, and it's the OG for miners. A lot of miners still use it and it's very common amongst beginners, but oddly enough, it's actually not simple mining on Windows, even though the majority of us are very familiar with it. And it's not that Windows is just hard to use, it's more like it's very fragile. It can crash way more often and it needs special care comparing to a Linux-based mining operating system. But I also feel like every new miner has to try mining in Windows 10. It's like a way to connect with the tradition of a home GPU miner. We all have to go through breaking a keyboard or two because of blue screen. No, but seriously, Windows definitely can be a nightmare, especially if you're trying to set up AMD and NVIDIA at the same time. Now, when would I recommend Windows to someone? If you are new to mining and you just want to stay on Windows, especially if you're planning to use this mining rig or PC as well for personal use, then yes, Windows is a good choice because you can mine as well as surf the web or do whatever you want on the PC or rig. So if you're mining on your main PC, then definitely don't delete your Windows and install a mining operating system, because you're not going to be able to use your system for other than mining. Unless of course you run the mining operating system off of a USB or a different SSD. But on the bright side, Windows is free, so just keep in mind you don't have to buy any license to mine on Windows. I do show how to do that in a guide that I posted a long time ago, which is how to mine on Windows 10, and I will leave the link for that in the descriptions below. It's a bit outdated, but you still can follow the steps without any issues and it will work completely fine for you. Although I am planning on doing another version of this guide that is more up to date and it will contain more information for you. So in a nutshell, Windows for mining is not so bad. I mean, it is a love and hate relationship, especially with all these updates that come out every every other day and they restart out of nowhere and turn off your miner with it, which is very annoying. But then at the same time, we all started with Windows and I feel like it's just something nice to get your feet wet in mining. So now that wraps it up for Windows. Let's go ahead and talk about the Linux-based mining operating systems. There are many different operating systems out there that are made specifically for mining, and the benefits of using them is that they're easier to manage, especially if you have a big farm, because your rigs are all basically running and connected to your account, where you can usually sign into your web application and then modify all the rigs from there. That makes it a lot easier than having to go to each rig individually and then modify it if anything happens to it. And it's also very easy to get started with them as well. Most people get intimidated and they think it's Linux and it's going to be hard to understand and all that stuff, but honestly it does not take any knowledge of Linux. In some scenarios you need to know how to run a command in the terminal and all that stuff, but that's just basic stuff that you need to know in general when it comes to mining. So one thing for sure we can give for the mining operating systems are the convenience. Now in most scenarios they do come for a cost, and the cost is not that much, but it's still something that's out of your pocket. And other than the cost, there's also the worry of transparency. So some of the operating systems are open source while others are not, and if the platform is open source, it will give it more credibility and trust. And the reason being is that when it's open source, everyone can look at the code, and if there's anything sketchy, people will notice it. Now I'm not saying any of the private platforms have bad intentions or anything like that, but it's just something in general that it gives more trust to the project. Just to give you guys an idea of how this works, so basically you get this operating system flashed on a USB stick or an SSD, you plug it into your rig, you make sure you have internet or Wi-Fi connected, and then you boot your rig, and after that you most likely will see your rig pop up in your online account. Now if your rig doesn't pop up, that means you run into an issue, probably something that has to do with your mining rig's BIOS or some part is not connected properly. And if you guys do have any questions on your mining rig motherboard's BIOS, I did release a video recently about that topic, so feel free to check it out. The link will be in the descriptions below. So once your rig pops up in your account, you get to apply your flight sheet or whatever terminology they use for your miner, and then you can apply your overclocks and run your miner. And everything you want to do to it, you can do it online, shutting it down, rebooting, updating, and all that good stuff. So getting started on these mining specific operating systems is super easy. So since there's a lot of these mining specific operating systems, we're not going to browse through all of them and compare all of them. I personally have only used HiveOS, so I'm in no position to tell you which one is better until I get to test them out, but I don't recommend overthinking it either. Pick one and try it. If you liked it and it was convenient for you, then they did their job right. You can always test out all of them and decide which one you like after that. Their pricing structures are very similar. They almost all have a free rig option, so you can test it for free. Now one thing that's scary about a mining specific operating system, let's say somebody gets access to your account and you didn't secure it properly, then that means somebody can just direct all your mining rigs to their wallet rather than just this one rig that they catch in Windows or anything like that. Now this is very unlikely, but just make sure that you take your security seriously to avoid any issues like that. So as a wrap up for the mining specific operating systems, they're super convenient, they're easy to get started with, but they do cost some money. Now the final option is just running Ubuntu, which is also Linux based. Now Ubuntu will come naked, so you won't have any applications for mining or anything like that, and it will be similar to Windows. So if you install it, you have to download the miner applications and the overclocking and all that stuff on the rig itself, so you won't have a web application that you can access and all that fancy stuff. And now why would you want to run it on Ubuntu? And that is because it will be more stable than running it on Windows. You're avoiding the headache of auto updates and all that stuff from Windows, but the cost is that it does need a learning curve to get set up with it, because all the overclocking and everything like that won't have a specific software for it, at least as far as I know, and then you just want to install your mining softwares and run them that way. Now the bright side of using Ubuntu is that you have the flexibility to create your own tools, and that is if you're interested in that side of things. I have been planning on making a video for setting up in Ubuntu, but I have been procrastinating that idea for very long because it does take some time, but eventually I will have it out. Now that wraps up all three options. So first you have your Windows, and then you have the Linux based mining operating systems, and then you have just raw Ubuntu. So by now I'm sure you figured out what I'm using. I currently have 5 different mining rigs, and 4 of those rigs are on HiveOS for the reasons I've mentioned before. It's simple to use, convenient, and it's easier to manage multiple rigs on there. Now this would work with the other mining operating systems too. It's just for me so far I've only tried HiveOS, and I will be trying the other ones very soon. And then I have one last rig which is on Windows. Even though I've complained about them a lot, I still have one rig running on there, and that rig is my Radeon 7s, and I only have to look at it once a month if it ever crashes. It's super stable, it's been running without any issues, and that's why I'm not moving it from Windows at all. Now originally I've had all my mining rigs on Windows, but then I've slowly moved them over to HiveOS. I will also eventually be putting rigs on different mining operating systems just so I can try them out. Now my recommendation to you is first know how many GPUs you're trying to run. So if you have a mining rig with 6 GPUs or less, then I would leave Windows as an option so you can feel free to use it. But if you're trying to run a mining rig with more than 6 GPUs, I would honestly recommend going for a Linux-based mining operating system all the way, especially if you're trying to mix AMD with Nvidia. It will make your life a lot easier, you won't have to struggle with a lot of blue screens, and everything will be much more stable. One big advantage that Linux-based mining operating systems have over Windows is the fact that your mining overclocks have a less chance of resetting on you and then overloading your power supply. In Windows, your overclock settings might crash and then it keeps mining. You'll be using way more power than you should be using, but with the Linux-based mining operating systems, they boot up with the overclocks on the GPUs, so you have a very low chance of overloading your power supply. Now I hope this video helped you guys decide on which operating system you should be using. I know I didn't give you a straight answer, but this is just the best I can give you for you to decide on your own. Now if you're already using a specific operating system, please let me know in the comments below. I'm curious to hear what you guys use. Now that is it for this video. If you guys enjoyed it, please make sure to hit that thumbs up, and if you're new here, make sure to subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.